Hey guys, in this video I'm going to show you guys my handheld video game collection. And it's been a while since I've done a collection video, so I felt like I needed to do one. So yeah, let's get started. So here's the original Game Boy, which came out in 1989. And this actually isn't the Game Boy I originally had from back in the day. I actually sold mine for a Game Boy Pocket when that came out, and I'll get into that in a little bit. So yeah, this is the original Game Boy, and just to give a little bit of history, it was designed by Gunpei Yokoi, who was a beloved Nintendo employee, and basically his design philosophy for the Game Boy was to make something that was really low powered, which would make it very cheap and have a long battery life, um, and also it would be very durable. And Game Boy is pretty much the embodiment of that. I mean, competitors over the years released much more powerful hardware, but the Game Boy continued to be really successful. So yeah, so it's kind of hard to go back to the original Game Boy in terms of playability, just because the screen isn't very good. It's kind of green in a way, it's just kind of hard to make things out, and it also uses four AA batteries, which is crazy. So yeah, overall, it's kind of cool to have as like a nostalgia piece, but yeah, I wouldn't really use it to play actual games. So yeah. And next up we have let's see, the Game Boy Pocket, which came out a few years after the Game Boy. The Game Boy Pocket is just a Game Boy, but a lot smaller. Just to compare it a little bit, it's much smaller. It's also a lot thinner too. But So yeah, just more portable, and as you can see, the sort of bezel or whatever around the screen is gone, and it happened like a year after I got it, which pissed me off back in the day. Overall, I'd much prefer this to the original Game Boy. It uses two AAA batteries as opposed to four AA batteries, so that's a big plus. You can also adjust the contrast on the thing so it's easier to see, more flexible in that regard. Yeah. And here's the Game Boy Color, which came out in 1998, and as you might imagine, it's just a Game Boy with color. It took them long enough, but uh, it actually didn't have too much of a lifespan because it came out in 1998, and the Game Boy Advance came out in 2000 in Japan, so it only lasted about 2 or 3 years in the market. But it still had some pretty good games. It had Metal Gear Solid, Pokemon Crystal, let me think. Shantae, which is a really great one, but it's rare. Yeah, it had a few games. Still no backlight, which is kind of lame. But yeah, not too bad. I still wouldn't play this for Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, just because, like I said, no backlight. Yeah, that's the Game Boy Color. And next we have the Game Boy Advance. And here's the box, the Japanese box anyway. I got this at launch. This actually isn't the Game Boy Advance I used to have. Or like my sister lost mine for some reason. It was like the clear purple one, kind of like the Game Boy Color I just showed you. And someone sold me this like years later. Yeah. That aside, this really blew me away back when it came out, just because the graphics, like the Game Boy and Game Boy Color, kind of look like NES games, if not a little bit worse in a lot of cases. So I think the Angry Video Game Nerd recently put it best to say that portable games used to kind of sacrifice playability for portability. They weren't that great ultimately. There were some exceptions, of course, like Pokemon and the Zelda games and stuff like that. But I think the Game Boy Advance really sort of changed that perception and sort of made like really, really great console quality games on a handheld, or at least like a Super Nintendo quality game. It had a lot of Super Nintendo ports, that's for sure. But yeah, it had a lot of great original games. Some that come to mind are WarioWare, which is incredible. That was my favorite game of 2003. It had the Pokemon, Ruby and Sapphire, which were great. Had Mario Golf. Had a lot of stuff. Again, a problem with this is that it doesn't have a backlight. which, while it's comfortable to hold in your hand, as you might expect, it's the backlight really kills it, in my opinion. Which leads me to the next handheld, which is a breakthrough for Nintendo, the Game Boy Advance SP, which, as you can see, very slick. Sort of has a, hold on, it has a clamshell design. It looked really slick back in the day. It still does now to some degree. But yeah, for one, it had a backlight or a front light actually, and it also had rechargeable batteries, so no more buying AAA or AA batteries. So that was nice. And yeah, it was just a great overall little portable and one of the best ways to play the Game Boy Advance, but not the best, which brings me to my next handheld, if I can find it. Here we go. This is the Game Boy Advance SP AGS 101, which has a very nice backlit screen as opposed to a frontlit screen, and came out after the DS came out actually. So not many people got this thing. I don't even think it was released in some territories. Like I don't think Australia got it, and it only came out in a couple of colors, like this color, pink, and like this dark grayish one, and there was like a weird SpongeBob one. So yeah, it didn't get much of a distribution, but the screen looks incredible. This is the best way to play original Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, in my opinion. Let's just give a little test, just to prove to you how much better the screen is. So let's turn this on and this on. As you can see, this is a much brighter screen, a lot easier to see. So yeah, overall a great device and one I play often still. But that's not it for the Game Boy Advance. There's also the Game Boy Micro. And I forgot to show you the boxes for the other stuff, by the way. Here are the boxes for the Game Boy Advance SPs. Pretty nice. But yeah, here's the box for the Game Boy Micro. So this is the special edition sort of Famicom themed one, which is basically the Japanese NES. It looks really slick. This is like one of the coolest things that I own, just because of the design. And yeah, as you can see, so this is a really small device. Let's just compare it to the Game Boy for a second. So yeah, very tiny. It has an even better screen than the SP AGS 101 model that I just showed you. The problem is that it's too small. So while it's good for some games, if you're playing like a Final Fantasy game or something, the text is really small, so it's kind of hard to see. But otherwise, it's a really, really cool device, and I'm very happy to own this. So that's the end of the Game Boy Advance, and let's move on to what many of you probably are very aware of, the Nintendo DS, which came out in 2004. This was a launch day of the Nintendo DS. One of the most notable things is that it has two screens instead of one, which is kind of crazy at the time. Not unprecedented, but very weird. And it had a touchscreen, which is, this was before like the iPhone and like touchscreens became a big thing. This was when touchscreens were like only available at like museums. They were really lame. So this was a really big breakthrough in that regard. Kind of bringing back touchscreen to the mainstream. And at the time, I really loved it just because I was still kind of used to like the crappy like Game Boy graphics. So just to see things in 3D like Super Mario 64 was really mind blowing. It also had like cool like PictoChat, and the DS ultimately ended up having like a really great library of games. Like I probably have like 40 or 50 DS games, and I'm still like looking for new ones to play. So yeah, and this was also at the height of Nintendo. They're not doing so well right now. So yeah, the DS is definitely notable in that regard. But here's the next DS that I own, the DS Lite, which came out a couple years after the DS. So this is the Zelda one. Also, copied Pokemon Fire Red is in there for some reason. But yeah, so this is pretty much just a thinner version of the DS, just as a comparison. Much thinner and much sleeker. Um, Overall, pretty nice. A pretty nice handheld. The screen is much brighter, as the name DS Lite might indicate to you. One problem is that it's kind of hard to play Mario Kart DS on it. Like, it hurt my hand just to play it. So, if you want to play Mario Kart, I actually stick with the original DS. Um, but yeah, overall, a pretty damn good handheld. And let's see, the next thing on the list is the DSi, which came out in 2009, I believe. It's notable in that it has like a lot of new features, like a camera, which you can see. It's a really crappy one, by the way. It's like Game Boy camera quality almost. And it has a downloadable store, which has DSi exclusive games. The problem with that is that there ultimately weren't that many good DSi games. Some of them were alright, but it just wasn't supported enough, like a lot of other Nintendo things. But in terms of playability, it's really comfortable. It might be one of the best handhelds they've ever released in terms of like just holding it and the controls feel good. And yeah, I really like the DSi. Yeah. So that's the end of the DS for me. Oh yeah, fuse box, by the way. But yeah, so that's the end of the DS, and here is its successor, the 3DS, which came out a couple years ago. Not too old. I'm so torn on the 3DS because it. So I mentioned Gunpei Yokoi, and his sort of philosophy on making a battery efficient, sort of a cheap device. This is like the opposite of that. First of all, it was very expensive. I paid $250 for this. The price dropped like a few months later to $170, but still, if you compare this to the Game Boy Advance, which was $100 at launch, or the DS, which was $150, this is $250, and the battery life is just horrible. Like, you can only get like 3 hours out of this thing, and when it's in sleep mode, it drains it as well. So, in that regard, I really don't like the hardware that much. It's like the first time I've ever really said that about a Nintendo handheld. It has a lot of great first-party Nintendo games and Atlas games, which is really cool. Some notable ones are like, let me think, Shin Megami Tensei 4, Mario Kart 7 is really good. Super Mario 3D Land is great. I reviewed that, by the way. And so yeah, it definitely has the games, but yeah, the hardware I just don't really like, to be honest. And here's the next 3DS that I have. It's the one I just got less than a month ago. It's the Legend of Zelda: Link Between Worlds 3DS. And as you can see, it has the gold exterior, but it also has the black exterior on the back. Just sort of like the two worlds aspect of Link Between Worlds. So that's a really cool design. Again, kind of echo what I was saying about the 3DS, the original one. Not in love with it. This does have a little bit better battery life, and the screens are a little bit better, even though things are a little blurrier, since it keeps the same resolution as the original 3DS. So it's not perfect, but still a much better thing to own than a regular 3DS at this point. So that's all the Nintendo handhelds I own. Let's go to... Oh wait, no, sorry, I still have one more Nintendo handheld, which I've actually reviewed. I've given it its own video, which is the Game & Watch Super Mario Brothers. I should have done this earlier, but the Game & Watch is sort of the predecessor to the Game Boy, also made by Gunpei Yokoi. These were sort of standalone portable games where, it would have a little mini game. They're kind of like TI-83 calculator games, if you've ever played those. They're really simplistic, but pretty fun. And if you can just look at it, it looks great. Like, it looks really slick. It looks better than the Game Boy even. And it also doubles as an alarm clock, which is kind of a weird thing. But back in the day, having an alarm was really kind of a notable thing. I mean, now you have it on your phone, your DS, and everything. But back then, It was more of a novelty to have things like alarms, and people would just stick them on anything and call that their invention. So yeah, that's the Game & Watch. If you want to know more, watch my video that's dedicated to it. Alright, now I'm done with Nintendo handhelds, so let's move on to the next one, which is the Sega Game Gear. I don't know exactly when this came out, just because the Game Gear doesn't really have a special place in my heart. For one, it has terrible battery life. It just eats them up immediately. So if you ever want to play Game Gear, you got to get the AC adapter and play there. Kind of ruins the portability factor, but that's the way it goes with this thing. The screen is also kind of crappy. Even though it is in color and has a backlit screen, it's just kind of crappy overall. The games weren't very good. It had some Sonic games that were alright, but not really a Game Gear fan in general. So, I don't know. That's the Game Gear, everyone. And next up is another non-Nintendo portable, kind of an obscure one. This is the Neo Geo Pocket Color. This was made by SNK back when they made hardware. You know, they made things like King of Fighters and Metal Slug and things like that. And it's kind of a neat little system. It's sort of like a system for SNK fans. It has like a lot of ports, like the fighting games and Metal Slug and stuff like that. It's actually kind of a cool little piece of hardware. The only negative is that it doesn't have a backlit screen. So that sucked, but it has a really nice clicky control analog stick, which makes it really great for fighting games, which it had a lot of, so that was really neat. Yeah, overall pretty damn cool system, and since it's pretty obscure, I'll just kind of show you what it looks like. This is the boot up screen. As you can see, pretty modest, but alright, the battery's dead, so let's get past that screen. Oh yeah, one notable thing is that it had a Sonic, which is kind of a weird thing back then, because that was back when, of course, Sega made their own hardware. But yeah, overall a pretty neat system, especially for like SNK games. Moving on to a very obscure one that actually never came out here, the Wonder Swan. Well, and this is actually like the second iteration, which is the Swan Crystal, which means it pretty much just has a better screen. But yeah, this was oddly enough made by Gunpei Yokoi, who I mentioned earlier, the creator of the Game Boy. So just to give a little tragic story, basically he made the Virtual Boy, it was a huge failure. They sort of shamed him out of the company, so he went elsewhere, and then he made this, and then he died. It was it's actually one of the saddest stories you'll hear. But so yeah, it kind of has the same design philosophy as the Game Boy in that it's very low powered. It only uses one AA battery, but it lasts a really long time. And sort of one of the neat little things about it is that you can play it horizontally like this, or vertically like this. So that was kind of neat. Again, kind of like the Neo Geo, I'll kind of show you how it looks. Oh yeah, it's made by Bandai, by the way. I feel like that's important to mention. So this is Final Fantasy 1, which is the only game I have for it. So let's take a look. It's in Japanese, of course. So yeah, that's the theme. Still a great theme to this day. So yeah, that's the Wonder Swan. Pretty cool little handheld to have. Or Swan Crystal, I should say. Sorry, I messed it up twice. So let's move on to the Sony end of the portables scene. This is the PSP. So this is the PSP 2000. Hold on, let me show you the box. It's kind of a crappy box. It looks kind of cheap, but anyway, yeah. So that's the PSP box. So yeah, this is the PSP 2000, which was the first iteration of the PSP. I also have the 1000, but I don't know where it is right now. But so yeah, this was Sony's foray into the portable industry, and this was when Sony was at their height. Like the PS2 was just on fire, and everyone thought the PSP would roll over the DS just because Sony was like the king shit. but that actually didn't end up happening. It was pretty popular in Japan because of games like Monster Hunter, but it didn't catch on anywhere else really. In terms of usability, I'd never really liked the PSP. It doesn't feel comfortable to hold, and the analog stick is like this little nub thing. It just kind of feels bad. And the PSP 2000 feels kind of cheap and light compared to the 1000. The games were okay. It has a lot of Japanese-centric, interesting titles, but it also has like some really boring ones like Jack and Daxter, like titles I'd never want to play. Um, One notable thing that like you can't mention without when you're talking about the PSP is the custom firmware thing, which pretty much let anyone with little effort sort of play emulators and like hacked PSP games and free PSP games and PS1 games, and kind of led to Sony's downfall in terms of software sales. So that sucked for them, but it actually was kind of cool. Um, as long as you weren't pirating anyway, because pirating isn't cool. But so yeah, that's the PSP. It definitely has a place in this industry, but I didn't really love it that much. Oh yeah, UMD sucked too, by the way. Just wanted to mention that. Next up, we have the PSP Go, which was the sort of third iteration on the PSP. Let's get that out of side. So yeah, this is the PSP Go. It was notable for not having the UMD slot, which was very good in my opinion. Though I kind of do miss having physical games. Pretty much just a digital-only PSP. That's smaller, easier to use in terms, or easier to carry around. Kind of has like a sort of slide mechanic where to play games you sort of slide it like that. It also turns on automatically. We'll see if it does that here, or if it doesn't have any battery. Apparently not. So yeah. Oh, okay. I guess it does have battery. So yeah, not too much to say. Feels better than the PSP Go, or the original PSP. Uh, I got it for cheap, so if you can get it for cheap, I'd recommend this one over the other PSPs. You can also put custom firmware on it, so overall, not too bad. Alright, so that's the PSP Go. And that leads us to our final handheld. If I can find it, the PlayStation Vita, which is the current Sony handheld and came out very recently, last year in the US and a little bit before that in Japan. Show you guys the box. Kind of a minimalist PS2-esque box. Not too exciting though. But so yeah, there's a lot to say about the Vita. I mean, I really love it to be honest. It pretty much fixed everything the PSP had wrong with it. For one, it has two analog sticks and they're much nicer. They're not little nubs, they're actually sort of analog sticks. So that's good. And it also has a really nice screen. Easily the best screen on any portable, except for like maybe the iPhone 5S or whatever, if you count that as a portable. But yeah, in terms of dedicated portables, it has a really really great screen. Games just look incredible on it. It has near PS3 level graphics, I'd say. Sleep mode, unlike the 3DS, is really useful. Can last you about a week or so, maybe even more actually. I love this thing, except for the memory cards. They're proprietary memory cards that are very expensive. For example, a 32 gigabyte memory card will cost you $80, which is insane. You can get like a 32 gigabyte SD card for like 20 right now. So yeah, the memory cards are overpriced, so that makes me not want to buy digital games as much. I only have a 4 gigabyte memory card, which came with the system, and normally systems don't even come with a memory card, so that sucks. But yeah, I really love the Vita. It has one of my favorite games that I've ever, Persona 4 Golden. I reviewed that last year. Just an incredible game. I love it. It also has a lot of really other interesting games that I've actually built kind of a decent collection on this thing, and I'm always looking for more games on it. Like some really good ones are like Dragon's Crown, which is also on PS3, but it's best on Vita, and Gravity Rush, which is a really cool game. Spelunky and stuff like that, and also a lot of games are quote unquote free on PS Plus. So I'd highly recommend the Vita, even though it's selling like crap. Here's a little lesson: a lot of the times, the things that don't sell well can often be the best things around, which I'll get into when I review Super Mario 3D World and the Wii U, which is also sounding like crap. I'll release that video review soon, by the way. But yeah, back to the Vita. Yeah, not too much else to say about it. Highly recommend it, and much better than the PSP. So that concludes this video about my handhelds. I really like playing games on handheld just because you can sort of lay down in bed and play, and you're kind of sucked into the game more because the screen is right next to your face. Like I feel like that's what made me like Persona 4 Golden more, just because it's right there, and like you're not like distracted by other things on your computer or whatever. You're not like checking your phone constantly. It's more quote unquote immersive that way, kind of like PC gaming actually. So so yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this collection, and now that I have some more free time these days, I will be able to make more videos in a much quicker fashion. And so thanks for watching, and yep, see you soon.